Okay, I wanted to tell you guys about a positive update. Now, this will not happen in the immediate future, and maybe not even in the immediate, like in like the next week or two. Actually, no, it would be early March, so it might actually be in the next week or two, but in the probably in the next 2 weeks. So this isn't something that's immediately going to happen, but something that might happen soon. And the reason why it's not going to immediately happen, even though the sooner we get the Ukraine aid, the better, is because this is supposed to be a pressure point. So Brian Fitzpatrick is a strong supporter of Ukraine within the Republican Party. This is somebody that I consider as almost unwaverable. Now, if he wavers ever, then you'll know that the Trump has captured every person in the party. Okay, that's when you'll know. Brian Fitzpatrick is somebody that's, I think, on the more pro-Ukraine side, and there's a few others with him as well. Even though those ones are talking to Axios and other outlets anonymously, and he's talking about them and won't give their names, are preparing a discharge petition. Now, for those of you who don't know, a discharge petition, if a House Speaker, like say Mike Johnson, didn't want to bring legislation that had already passed the Senate and had already gotten through committee to a vote, like say this legislation, then he can take it, put it on the House floor. Somebody can take it and put it on the House floor as long as they get as a majority of votes. Now, back in the day, in the 1930s, it used to just be you needed like 1/4 of the votes, but now you need a majority. And so since you need a majority, you need at least 218. And so we already have that with the Democrats. In fact, Tom Suzy was just sworn in from New York's 3rd District, and that means we have at least one more extra vote in favor of Ukraine aid for that discharge petition, one step closer to a potential discharge petition. But you need to get the Republicans to sign on. And back in the day, you could do it anonymously, which made it an even bigger threat for the House Speaker. But today, you would have to do it publicly, meaning that if Brian Fitzpatrick was to sign a discharge petition, or other Republicans were, they'd have to do it in public, which then could come with right-wing backlash, money being funneled to their opponents, Donald Trump coming out and condemning them as they hate America or terrorists, or he'll like suggest that they touch kids like he did with Ron DeSantis and his students, which was really creepy and is a real thing. Go check it. He made a post about it on Truth Social. And to go after them. And so there is some potential political backlash. And for that reason, on top of the fact that they probably don't want to embarrass their own party and embarrass their House Speaker, who is right now still holding up the Ukraine aid because he is still asking for concessions. It's still hard to read intent. We can make a whole segment about that in and of itself. But Brian Fitzpatrick, at the very least, wants this to be a pressure point. And that's what he emphasizes in this interview or this conversation they had with Axios, that this is not something that they're going to pull on really quickly. This is something they're letting circulate so that Mike Johnson knows that if he doesn't do something on Ukraine aid, then a discharge petition might make a Ukraine aid vote happen. He'll get no compromise, period, on Ukraine aid. And not only will he get no compromise, period, on Ukraine aid, it'll also be horribly embarrassing for him as members of his own party went around him with Democrats to usurp his authority. In fact, in this bill, I think it talks about other Republicans talking about like, hey, I don't know if, we would be able to, one second, let me see. Here it is. Asked about the depth of Republican support, he told reporters, this is Fitzpatrick, more than you think. A lot of people who know that it's the right thing to do. One House Republican, speaking on the condition of anonymity, told Axios that they will sign if there's no other progress. So right now we got Mike Johnson saying like, we will address Ukraine aid in a timely manner. And recently he gave another interview. It was a quick interview. It was people asking him like, hey, there's 23 parliaments across Europe that have asked in parliaments, in some cases, like both chambers and their legislatures, who have asked the United States to send Ukraine help. It's a bunch of countries. It was Italy, it was Iceland, it was Denmark, it was Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. It was tons and tons and tons of countries. The UK, a ton of countries. And a reporter walked up to him and was like, so what do you have to say to them? And he said, we'll do it after we fund the government. Because right now, this week, they're negotiating to try to stop a government shutdown that will happen if they don't find a deal after this week is over. And so what he's trying to, the argument from him now, which is continuing to delay a vote on Ukraine aid or any Ukraine aid through, is, okay, fine, we'll deal with Ukraine aid later after we've waited since September of last year, by the way, and Congress hasn't voted on aid to Ukraine for over a year, on top of the negotiations and this whole debate starting in September of last year, and the 5 months of negotiation that followed as they tried to get an immigration deal that was then sunk by Donald Trump. But he's saying, we'll wait a little bit more, then we'll get a deal on the border, then we'll deal with Ukraine in his quote-unquote timely manner. Now, I could make the argument that, hey, we could attach Ukraine aid to a continuing resolution because there's a high likelihood that it will probably be a continuing resolution, even though Mike Johnson said it would not be a continuing resolution this time and he actually get his shit together. Didn't happen. Or you could attach it to just a budget bill, period. If they do end up passing a budget bill, they could attach Ukraine aid to it. Or if he doesn't like either of those things, he could just have a straight up or down vote on Ukraine aid in the House tomorrow. There's no reason why you can't walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. You know, other legislative leaders, this is the least productive Congress in over 100 years since like the Great Depression when it comes to passing legislation. You know, other legislative leaders have compromised in the past and been able to, you know, find legislative solutions and been able to get things done. I don't know if for Mike Johnson, he can only do one thing at a time. We can only negotiate the border. Well, we can only negotiate the budget. Oh, we could. No, you can't deal with the fentanyl crisis at the same time. Look, I don't want to get on Nancy Pelosi and start like cheerleading her, but Nancy Pelosi could deal with two things at the same time. She could deal with three things at the same time. Sometimes she would be dealing with things that I didn't want her to deal with, or not dealing with things that I needed her to deal with, that I wanted her to deal with, that I wanted our party to address, but she could deal with multiple things at the goddamn same time. So I don't know what the problem is. So if it's an issue of oh, we got to do this right now, I call bullshit. If it's an issue of we still haven't gotten our party in line, or we sunk the immigration deal and we still don't know what we're going to do, then that's much easier to believe, unless it's I never supported Ukraine aid in the first place and I was lying when I took my position and that I wanted to support Ukraine aid. Now that Trump's against it, I'm against it too, which is of course the thing none of us want to believe. But even if that is the case, we can still pressure him. And if that is the case, then this will be the end result we will have to fall upon. It will have to be the discharge petition, because in that scenario, he's never going to pass it. Now, I still don't believe that. I don't think Mike Johnson is principally against Ukraine aid. I also don't think he particularly cares about Ukraine aid. That's why he was willing to leverage it. Anyway, enough of this. We'll see if it comes to this. The leverage is good, but the sooner they try to pull the trigger on this, in my opinion, the better, because the front line is being impacted right now. And if you look at like Russian casualty data, if you look at the equipment they're losing and the amount of damage the Ukrainians are doing with the little bit of ammo they have left, it's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, look at this. This is public OSCENT data captured by Andrew. You can follow him on Twitter, Andrew Perpetua. I never know how to pronounce his last name correctly. But if you look at this data, look how much the red is Russian. You can see all the T-80 BVs, D-30 artillery guns, T-90Ms, T-72s, BMP-3s, BMP-2s, BMP-1s, BTR-82s, BTR-80s. Oh my God, all this stuff, not to mention all the vans, of course, the vans and the U-Haul trucks and all that nonsense. If they can do this with the ammo we've given them right now, as the Russians are trying to push on every front, imagine what they could do if we gave them the equipment that they needed. I know Ben Hodges was talking recently on NPR about the 800,000 shells that the Europeans are trying to gather together. He says that's 1/5 of what they need. Imagine if we gave them what they need. Imagine. Think about that for a moment. So my point, like, a lot of this is damaged and abandoned. Some of these are, I mean, damaged as in they could be picked up, abandoned as in maybe they'll be picked back up. But these are equipment losses that cannot just be remanifested. And if we put pressure on this and gave the Ukrainians the equipment they needed, then the Russians would be in a real pickle come this year as they're trying to push the war. And I think they wouldn't be pushing as hard as they are right now unless they wanted the war to end sooner rather than later, because they're feeling the pressures on their society. They know that the 6-year, 7-year long war, while maybe they could still come out on top, they don't know. And I don't think they know with certainty that they would come out on top in that scenario. They'd rather avoid all the social discontent, damage to the Russian economy, damage to the Russian army, or the fact that maybe American aid could pick up in the future, depending on how the geopolitical situation or the electoral politics changes. Or, of course, he could be just trying to improve his negotiating position come 2025 if we have somebody else in the White House. Who knows? Either way, the longer we wait, the worse these numbers are going to get, and the opportunity that the Ukrainians could have in smashing their advancing Russian army, it could go away. And not only would it go away, but then the Ukrainians are going to be hit harder and harder and harder. And it's a question of how soon do you think it will get to a point where real breakthroughs are possible? Real breakthroughs where it's not just, oh, lose a village there, but there's so little ammo that they could legitimately do a breakthrough. And I would make the argument that while I don't think a breakthrough immediately is likely, I also don't think it's impossible under the current situation. I don't think it's impossible. If you continue to starve them of ammunition, eventually, if you don't have enough ammo, the Russians, if they're continuing to get foreign imports and they're continuing to produce at a higher rate than the Ukrainians, will not being given parts of our stockpiles or being approved aid since September of last year, it's going to have an impact.